So this started quite a few years ago when there was a seminar about choreography in narrative and concentrating particularly on Kafka. And this is when the idea was born to celebrate the centenary of Kafka's death. And the group of academics involved were starting to piece together the idea of creating some kind of festival to celebrate Kafka's death and to invite some artists to have a reaction to his work. And so already from the beginning I was involved and of course extremely excited at the idea of approaching another Kafka work, as I had already done the Metamorphosis. So I was very keen to come back to Kafka, but through another door. I never really discovered Kafka. It was more that I knew about it, and we'd never really had it in our school curriculum, and it wasn't really a part, like there wasn't a book lying around the house that I would kind of pick it up and discover this kind of literature. But I did know about it in high school, as one of my friends had told me about someone who was doing maybe a short piece or reading a story about a person who was, you know, transformed into a giant insect. So I always had it in the back of my mind. So when it came to working at the Royal Opera House, and I was trying to find a project to collaborate with Edward Watson on, it kind of just landed in my head, and I was like, oh, there's that story. Maybe that would work really well. I did know about Stephen Burkoff's version, which was like a dance, more like a physical theatre production of it, which used text and it was very physical. So I did know about that. But once I started looking into it, I realized that there weren't many dance, you know, adaptations of it, or maybe quite obscure ones. So that's how I really got into it. So I bought the book and read it and was completely absorbed by it. And also quite surprised at how undescriptive or sort of unemotional the writing was, which I really liked because it provided a good template to work towards the adaptation for it from. But then what was interesting is once you start reading it again and again, and you start to really dig into the text, it sort of starts to lift off the page and the emotions start to come. But the moment you start to physicalize it, it's already hugely emotional and absurd in equal measure. And you have this, and provides itself, I think, fantastically for any dance adaptation or movement adaptation or kind of theatrical sense. Turning Kafka's writing, literary writing, into dance, I think actually it's quite a straightforward process, especially in the Metamorphosis, for example, because he does write down a lot of Gregor's movements, which you can actually follow through the pages, very descriptive, physically what's happening, even with the other characters, about like when his mother faints and then him getting on top of her, or just the way he walks and moves around the room, or throwing up on the doorknob. You know, various things which are very visceral, and it gives you a real sense of how it can move, and also just already physicalizing the human body into that of the insect is already something very interesting is going to happen. It was much harder with, well, initially it was much harder with a hunger artist because it's the opposite. This character is actually very still and just waiting and enduring time. So I had to ask the question: how would he move? How would he behave? And it was more about, at least in my head, of what might happen at night to this character. How can he express himself in a slightly more abstract way through movement, in terms of that there was also something going on with his body. And then I found actually there was a big scope for movement vocabulary, because lots of various things were going on. And so actually, for example, the starvation, when the body does get to 7 days of starvation, you actually feel quite amazing. You feel very light, you feel very in tune with your body, you feel very powerful, which is kind of very interesting, because there's a peak before a descent. And then, of course, there's the descent and the fatigue of the body. But somehow, through endurance, you are able to express these qualities in a very, you can go into a very poetic sense, almost like an aside in a Shakespearean play, where you wouldn't necessarily know that it's sort of to the audience, but not a part of the reality of what's really happening. And so Kafka provides a lot of space in the writing for these for this kind of expression to come out. So working with both the Metamorphosis and Hunger Artist, both were very, very interesting processes. Working on the Metamorphosis, I didn't really know any academics who, but like personally, who had written books and studied Kafka. I had a very little thin book about Kafka's life that I loved. It's a very good book, but we really had our own process of going into our own research and doing a lot of discussing around the table, and I was giving a lot of the dancers homework to do, to bring homework in to go deeper into the piece. I worked very close with the designer about what period we wanted to set it in, how we were going to approach the piece musically with the composer, and then how I was going to work with the cast in terms of how to devise the piece and what the concept was. So, and everything just kind of flowed, and we didn't really. It felt like we knew what we were doing, but we didn't really know what the outcome was going to be. It felt like quite an experiment at the time, especially the opening scenes, which were very pedestrian in a way, almost unchoreographed. They were just people doing things, but they were very specific, so it was able to repeat in terms of the day 1, 2, and 3 of before his transformation, which I wanted to go back and not start where Kafka starts. I wanted to just go back and kind of show you the man before we went into what he transformed into. When it came to working on Hunger Artist, I was very, very excited, because I could then work with the Kafka academics, let's call them, the Kafka gang. And this was a completely different process, because I knew that I had all these incredible minds, and we had access to that. So I requested that we spend 3 days and to go through the text. And we spent 3 days almost line by line going through the text, which was incredibly rich and rewarding, and an incredible insight into how to navigate through this particular story. And it gave so much food for thought, and it provided so much inspiration. But what was great about the whole process with the academics is that all the academics at the end of the process were like, here's the information, you've got it all, now forget everything and go do your thing. And almost getting this consent to feel free with the adaptation, because I already had some ideas that it would be something quite different. And it's one thing reading something off a page, which will always win in terms of like your experience to Kafka, because that is the closest you will ever get, just by reading it and imagining it in your mind. The moment you transform something into an adaptation, it's already going to be something else. But saying that, the moment you're reading something, you're already creating your own adaptation in your head, because your idea of a character or a moment might be very different to how someone else reads it. So I do think that that's fascinating, how what comes off the page is already adaptation in your mind, as opposed to also just inventing one and then presenting it to an audience. So I felt like what we achieved with A Hunger Artist, I definitely wouldn't have arrived at that place if I hadn't had that deep understanding of the text and more insight into Kafka's life than I had done with the Metamorphosis. But also saying that the kind of the naivety that I had in creating the Metamorphosis, I think was also very helpful in terms of the fact that we didn't really have any set of rules about what it should be. We just took it on.